They gave me 11 minutes to speak at the hearing that was meant to end my life as a free man. I used 4 of them, and when I sat back down, my son could not look at me because he finally understood that the quiet old man he'd written off had been taking notes the entire time. My name is Walter Brennan, no relation to anyone famous, though my late wife used to joke I had the eyebrows for it. I'm 79 years old. For 35 years I was a surgeon, which is a fancy way of saying I spent my career walking into rooms where everyone was frightened and my only job was to stay calm enough for all of us. You learn things doing that. You learn that panic is loud and competence is quiet. You learn to watch hands, not mouths. And you learn that the most dangerous moment is never the crisis itself. It's the moment everyone decides what's true before the facts are in. My son decided what was true about me on a Tuesday in March. I know it was a Tuesday because I checked my watch out of a habit I've never broken, and the watch I check is not mine. It's my wife's. Small, gold, a thin worn band, a face barely the size of a thumbnail. Eleanor wore it 41 years. When she died, I started wearing it on my smallest finger, where it fits if I don't bend the knuckle. People assume it's sentiment. It is. But it's also the most reliable thing I own, and that Tuesday, it told me my son had been sitting in my kitchen for 2 hours, waiting to tell me I was no longer fit to tell time. He didn't say it like that, of course. Nobody cruel ever says it like that. Stay with me, because I'm going to tell you exactly what they filed, exactly what I did about it, and exactly what was written on the one piece of paper my son never thought to read. The same way he never thought I'd read the ones he handed me. But I'll tell you now, so you don't spend the next half hour hoping for something I can't give you. I won, and winning cost me my son. Both of those things are true, and I've had a year to sit with the fact that they don't cancel out. If you've ever been the steady one in the family, the one everyone leaned on right up until the day they decided leaning on you was a liability, then before I go on, do me one small favor and stay to the end of this. Not for me. There's a reason, and you'll see it. Now let me take you back to that Tuesday. He'd brought my granddaughter, which was the first thing that told me something was wrong. Daniel never brought Mia on a weekday. She had school. But there she was at my kitchen table doing homework, and there was Daniel making coffee in my house, like he was softening a blow, and there, though she came later, would be his wife, Carol, who is the person I want you to understand before you decide how to feel about all this. Because I don't think Daniel did this. I think Daniel let this be done, which is a different and more ordinary kind of failure. Carol grew up with nothing and watched it stay nothing no matter how hard the adults around her worked. She married my son and spent 15 years braced for the floor to drop. And last year it did. Daniel's business took on debt I didn't know about until much later. The kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already in the walls. I understand fear like that. I've seen it on 100 faces. Fear makes good people do organized, reasonable, terrible things. And it lets them call those things love the whole time they're doing them. Carol wasn't a villain, she was drowning. And she'd found a life raft, and the raft was me. That morning Daniel slid a folder across the table. He'd printed everything, tabbed it even. He told me he'd been worried about me since Mom passed. He said I'd seemed confused. He brought up the time I'd left the stove on, once, in November, the week after the funeral, when I'd have left my own name somewhere if you'd asked me for it. He brought up a missed property tax payment. He had a little list. He'd been keeping a little list, my son, the way you keep evidence. And then he asked me to sign something that would let him help manage things. Just for a while, just so you don't have to worry. I want to tell you I saw all of it instantly. I didn't. The first thing I felt wasn't suspicion. It was a kind of vertigo, the floor of 40 years of being this boy's father tilting under me. I looked at him buttering this over with so much care, and I checked Eleanor's watch on my finger, the way I do, and the small cold weight of it brought me back. I said, "Let me read it tonight, Daniel. I read everything. You know that." Something crossed his face. Not guilt exactly, closer to inconvenience. And that flicker was the first fact I had. Because a son who's genuinely frightened for his father wants him to read it. Only a son who needs you not to looks at you like that. I told him, of course, "Take your time, Dad," and he gathered up Mia and left the folder, and I sat in my kitchen as the light went orange. And I read all of it. Twice. The way I once read a chart before I'd let anyone hand me an instrument. It wasn't a help managing things form. The top of it asked the county to find that I was an incapacitated person. Here's what I knew that he didn't know I knew. I knew the difference between someone helping you and someone replacing you. Because I'd spent my career on the line between the two, I knew that the word guardian sounds like an arm around your shoulder and functions like a hand around your throat. Once a court grants it, the person it's granted over can lose the right to manage money, to sign anything, sometimes even to decide where they live. I knew the paperwork in front of me was the opening move of exactly that. And I knew one more thing, the thing that mattered most, the thing I'm going to make you wait for. Because I made them wait for it, and I want you to feel the shape of that wait. I knew there was a document in my house with Daniel's name on it that he had forgotten existed. Eleanor and I had signed it 9 years earlier. He'd been in the room. He'd been on his phone. But I'm getting ahead. Let me tell you what I did first, because it's the part I'm actually proud of, and the part that's useful to you if you're ever standing where I stood. I did nothing. I did nothing visible. I called Daniel 2 days later and told him, in a voice I deliberately made a little slower than my own, that I'd looked at his papers and thought he was probably right, that I'd been struggling, that it would be a relief to have him handle things. I heard the exhale on the other end of the line. I heard Carol's voice in the background asking who it was. I told my son I trusted him. I have told families the worst news a person can hear, and never once raised my voice. I can be calm when calm is a scalpel. So I was calm, and I was agreeable, and I performed, for the better part of 2 months, exactly the confused, grateful, fading old man they'd already decided I was. I let Daniel drive me to appointments. I let him help me with the mail, which meant I learned precisely which accounts he was watching. I let Carol tidy my study, which meant I learned she went straight for the filing cabinet. And I learned to leave the boring decoys in the front of the drawer. And while I performed helplessness, I did what I have always done in a crisis. I gathered everything, slowly, and I told no one what I was building. Every day I checked Eleanor's watch and noted the time, and every day I wrote down what had happened, in a hand that was still perfectly steady, in a notebook I kept somewhere my son would never look, inside the cover of an old medical text on a shelf he'd long ago stopped seeing. Dates. What was said. The morning Carol mentioned too lightly that the house was really too much for one person. The afternoon Daniel asked if I'd thought any more about somewhere with people around. Each entry small, each one a stitch. You don't close a wound with one big pull. You close it with a row of small ones. Even. Patient. And you don't rush. Because rushing is how you tear what you're trying to save. Stay with me. Because the watch is about to matter more than I've let on. About 6 weeks in, Daniel made his first real mistake, and it was the watch that caught it. We were at my kitchen table again. He'd brought more papers. There were always more papers now. And as I signed where he pointed, slow and careful, he said, not even looking up, "You should probably let me hold on to Mom's watch, Dad, for safekeeping. You're going to lose it on that finger." I felt the whole thing turn over in my chest. Not anger, clarity. Because a man who wants to protect his father's keepsake asks gently and lets it go when the old man says no. A man running an inventory of what he's about to control reaches for the one thing that isn't on any account statement. The thing with no dollar value and all the value. Because taking it is the proof, even to himself, that there are no limits left on what he gets to decide for you. I said no. Just that. The first hard no I'd given him in 2 months. And I watched him file it away as another symptom. See how he clings, see how he's not himself, when in fact it was the most myself I'd been since Eleanor died. That night I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a lawyer, not the family one, a new one, a woman who specialized in exactly this, and who, when I described what was happening, went very quiet, and then said the sentence that told me I'd found the right person. "Mr. Brennan, how much of this can you document?" I told her I had 11 weeks of it, dated, in my own hand. I heard her pen start moving. "The second call I won't tell you about yet. That one's the detail. That one waits. The petition went to a hearing because I let it. My lawyer wanted to fight it quietly, head it off before a judge ever saw it. I told her no. I'd spent my whole life learning that some things have to happen in the open, or they happen again in the dark. I wanted Daniel to stand in a room with a record of it and understand, fully, in front of someone with the authority to call it what it was, what he had tried to do to his father. I didn't want to win in a hallway. I wanted him to see me win. That's not the calm part of me. I'll own that. That's the part that's just a father whose son had measured him for a coffin and gotten the dimensions wrong. The morning of the hearing, I dressed the way I used to dress to deliver bad news. Clean, plain, no armor that looked like armor. I put Eleanor's watch on my finger. Daniel and Carol were already there when I arrived. They'd brought their lawyer, and they'd brought Mia, which I will never forgive, and which told me, more than anything, how sure they were. You don't bring your daughter to watch you win something you're ashamed of. They weren't ashamed. They thought they were saving me. That's the part that still keeps me up. Not that they were cruel, that they were so certain they were kind. Daniel's lawyer went first. He was good. He laid out the stove, the property tax, the increasing isolation, the concerning rigidity. My no about the watch made it in. Of course it did. Clings to objects, resistant to assistance. He had a tidy story. And in that story, I was a man losing the thread of his own life, and his client was a son doing the hard, loving work of catching it. Then it was my turn. I had 11 minutes. I used 4. I stood up. I didn't take any papers with me, which surprised the judge. You could see it. I left the notebook with my lawyer. I just stood there, an old man with his dead wife's watch on his little finger. And I spoke the way I once spoke to a room of frightened residents. Plainly, slowly, with nothing wasted, I said, "My son believes I can't be trusted to manage my own affairs. So I'd like to manage the next 4 minutes, and you can all decide for yourselves." I told them the dates. I told the judge there was a record, 11 weeks of it, contemporaneous, in my own hand, and that my counsel had it. I told her about the decoy files and what I'd learned by watching which drawers got opened. I told her, without heat, that the isolation they described was me being driven to appointments by the very person who'd filed to control me, and that the confusion was a single bad week in the worst month of my life, the month I buried the woman whose watch I was wearing. And then I said the thing I'd been holding since that Tuesday in March. I said, "My son asked me to surrender my wife's watch for safekeeping. I'd like the court to understand why I refused, not because I'm confused about its value, because I understand its value exactly. It keeps better time than the story being told about me today." The room was very quiet. I checked the watch. 4 minutes. I sat down. But none of that is what undid him. What I'd said was enough to slow it. Maybe enough to stop the petition. It wasn't enough to end it. The thing that ended it was the second phone call. It was the detail, and it's time I gave it to you. 9 years before any of this, when Eleanor was first sick the first time, the time she beat it, she and I had done the responsible thing and put our affairs in order. We'd named, in a document witnessed and filed and entirely legal, the person who would speak for each of us if we ever truly couldn't speak for ourselves. The medical decisions, the financial authority, all of it. We'd thought hard about who. We did not choose Daniel. We loved him. But even 9 years ago, Eleanor had looked at me over the kitchen table, the same table, and said the truest thing anyone ever said about our son. "Walter, Daniel loves us, but Daniel panics. Don't ever put your life in the hands of a man who panics." So we chose her younger sister, Ruth. Steady, unsentimental Ruth. A retired court clerk who had read more legal paper than my whole family combined. We chose Ruth. We filed it properly. And Daniel had been in the room when we signed. 17 and bored and on his phone. And he had forgotten it the way you forget things that don't yet have teeth. That was my second phone call. I called Ruth. And Ruth, who keeps copies of everything, to the people who underestimated him. If that's all you wanted from this story, you have it. Who has kept copies of everything for 50 years, drove to the hearing with the original document in a folder on her passenger seat. The document that already, legally, named who would act for me if I were ever found incapable, properly executed, witnessed, years on record, long predating $1 of Daniel's debt. My lawyer entered it, and the whole foundation of Daniel's petition simply fell through the floor. Because you cannot ask a court to appoint a guardian to make decisions a competent adult had already, soberly, in good health, assigned to someone else. The paper he never read had been sitting in my house, and in Ruth's files, the entire time he was building his little list. He'd measured me for a coffin and never once checked whether I'd already written my own instructions. The judge dismissed the petition. She used some words about it that I won't repeat, because they were harder on my son than I'd have been, and watching his face take them was not the victory I'd imagined. It was just my boy, learning in public that he'd been seen. So I won. I want to be honest with you about what winning was. The petition was dismissed. My independence was never in question again. The record shows, permanently, that Walter Brennan was of completely sound mind, and that the incapacity in that courtroom belonged entirely to King's. But Daniel doesn't call me. Mia doesn't either. She's not allowed to, I think. Or maybe she's just a child who absorbed which way the weather turned. Carol sent one letter, months later, and it wasn't an apology so much as an explanation. I read it twice, the way I read everything, and then I put it in the cabinet, in the front of the drawer, where the decoys go. I was right. Being right is a cold thing to hold at night. I sit in the same kitchen, at the same table, and I check Eleanor's watch out of habit, and it still keeps perfect time. And there is no one left in this family to keep it for. I beat my son. I did it cleanly, calmly, the way I've done the hardest things in my life. And the house is very quiet now, in a way that no court can rule on. Eleanor was right about Daniel. I was right about Daniel, and I would give a great deal to have been wrong. Here's the reason I asked you to stay. I am all right. I had Ruth. I had a document we signed 9 years before we needed it, when no one was frightened and no one was scheming, and we could think clearly about who we trusted. That paper is the only reason I'm telling you this from my own kitchen, instead of from wherever they'd have placed me. The watching, the notebook, the 4 calm minutes, none of it would have been enough on its own. What saved me was a decision I made when I was well, long before I was tested. Most people don't make that decision until they're already frightened, and by then, the people frightening you are the ones holding the pen. So I put together something, a plain-spoken guide, written from scratch, for the person who is the steady one in their family and is starting to feel the ground shift. How to put your money, your home, your medical voice, and your plain dignity somewhere a loving, panicking, indebted relative can't quietly reassign them. It is not legal advice. I'm a retired surgeon, not your attorney. And the single most important thing in it is this: talk to a qualified elder law attorney in your own state before you sign anything. But it will tell you what I wish someone had told me before I needed Ruth. Which papers to have, which conversations to have while you're well, and how to recognize the tabbed folder and the gentle voice for what they sometimes are. It's linked below. It costs less than lunch. I'd rather you never need it. The day Daniel slid that folder across my table, I already had what I needed, and I want you to have it too. On an ordinary Tuesday, long before anyone decides what's true about you. Now, I told you at the start there was one detail my son never read. You've heard it. But I didn't tell you what Eleanor had written, in her own hand, in the margin of our copy. The line Ruth's folder didn't have. The line meant only for me, I'll tell you, because she'd have wanted a house full of strangers to hear it more than she'd have wanted it kept. If they ever say you're not yourself, my love, check the watch. You'll know exactly what time it is. I'm Walter Brennan. I read everything, and I always know what time it is. Keep your own counsel. Read every page, and I'll see you in the next one.